Kansas City actually started in Westport. Westport was here first. It was a trading post, both for the trails, mostly the Santa Fe Trail, but also for the river. Eventually, it wasn't until 1850 that Kansas City was incorporated as a town, but it was not yet called Kansas City. That happened a couple of years later. The town is named after the Kansas River or the Kaw River. It was named before Kansas even became a territory or a state. So it was here first, and I think that causes a lot of confusion to people who wonder why in the world Kansas City is in Missouri instead of in Kansas. But of course it's in Kansas as well. They're the two cities, and that makes people even more confused. Missouri became a state in 1821, and at that point it was kind of the western edge of American settlement. It was a bill called the it was called the Nebraska-Kansas Bill, but everybody knows it as the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And the idea was that Kansas and Nebraska would become states. Certainly the Missourians moved over into Kansas, and Missouri was a slave state. Missouri was actually a very divided state. There were pro-slavery folks, but there were a lot of unionists as well. So there was an internal division within Missouri that was really rancorous and very violent, and then there was this violence that was flowing back and forth across the border. But then the part that surprised them is that a number of abolitionists and anti-slavery people in the Northeast primarily started bankrolling the movement of other settlers who weren't necessarily abolitionists, but they were people who came from northern states and they hoped that they would vote on a free soil side of things. They started to pay to help them to move to Kansas, and it became this really a powder keg of a situation. There was a lot of violence and intimidation. Lawrence was burned down. John Brown massacred some pro-slavery men along Pottawatomie Creek. They were raiding across into Missouri. So there was a lot of destruction of property, a lot of theft of property, murders, also liberation of enslaved people. This long history does have some kind of a footprint that still lingers today. But I think the ironic thing about it all is that today we're really the same people. We're very Midwestern, and the fact that we still imagine that we're somehow different is kind of laughable. There's not going to be any armed conflict between Missourians and Kansans anytime in the future, I think. I think it'll still linger in this silly sort of stuff, but I think that it's more about, some weird way that we all want to define ourselves. We're cutting ourselves into all these little segments in this really strange way, I think, that it's a little bit hard to understand if you don't understand this long history.